what a guy making fashion has anything to do with this fair. Fair question. Probably a lot of you are also not familiar with the brand that I started. So there's a QR code if you want to. Please feel free. It links to the website. Familiarize yourself if you want. I mean, there's a shop if you want to buy something. I'm not going to be mad. But mostly just, have a look so you can see kind of what I'm up to and have a little bit of context. And I guess if we're going to start talking about the metaverse and world building, we should probably go back to the beginning, go, a little bit back in time and, start as a child, even before I started in fashion. My dream was to really be a Disney Imagineer. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. I loved this idea of experiential design and, roller coaster is cool, but the whole start to finish user experience is something that just fascinated me with, everything. And that sort of led me into my interest in fashion because in a way it's very similar. There's always that link. It's not just a t-shirt or a dress or a lipstick, it's that lifestyle, that fantasy, that unattainable something, an image that compels you and sort of spins your world into something much, much greater. And I was lucky enough to, study in fashion and then work for a bunch of large businesses in the US and in Europe. But as I did, I started to become a little bit disillusioned with the industry itself from my own interests and just trying to sort of come to terms. Our lifestyles have changed quite a lot since the 90s, I would say, in a system that was essentially developed in the 50s. And there's a lot of questions coming up now. So I founded Phipps basically on the foundation of one simple question of just trying to do better. And what does that mean? And applying this rhetoric to every possible part of running a fashion business. So, how can you make clothing better? How can you do that in a more sustainable way? How can you make things more useful? How can you make things more educational? What parts of the process are necessary? What parts are unnecessary? And really applying this to every single thing that we do. We've done projects with NGOs. I don't know if you guys know Smokey Bear, who's the fire mascot of the US. But for example, doing projects that give back to the environment, not just sort of made sustainably, but actively teaching people about fire safety. And celebrating the culture of nature as a whole. And really working on every single part of the garment making process and the presentation process. And then suddenly COVID hit and the presentation process, which was the last standing thing that I knew, suddenly was kind of impossible. So I actually have a question for you guys, is, what is the purpose of a fashion show today, in 2021?
It's a brand story. It's just to give it's a theater, it's a brand theater.
And who are you presenting to?
To the world, because everything is being captured by everybody. So it's kind of a world brand theater.
Yeah, because it starts, once you start thinking about the purpose of this, all of a sudden the systems that why would you show, if it's for customers, why would you show it 8 months beforehand? If you can't buy something, why would you show it in June and delivers in stores in February?
Everything immediately.
And then there's see now, buy now, which is a whole other conversation, but then how do you make that appropriately for the right number of buyers? It's these bigger picture questions that have come up. And especially with COVID making the way that everyone has done business for half a century, basically, impossible. All of a sudden there's this idea of merchtainment, and that, do you know this word? It's a new, Merchtainment is basically, it's merchandise and the entertainment value that goes into that. It's term developed by Disney that was in regards to getting more people to buy like Mickey Mouse sweatshirts, basically. But how do you make the shopping process more fun? How do you make the garments themselves more fun? And how do you develop these sort of metaverses, I guess, that get people to hook in and then enjoy being part of that community even more? And yeah, with COVID, we were forced to start asking ourselves these questions in a way that I had never done it. So our solution was essentially to become a film production company rather than a fashion show company. And we switched gears pretty much immediately and started researching making films, which I had never done before. It turns out that the DNA of the brand was very, very useful in telling stories in film because there's a lot of layers to it. It's not just an aesthetic project. There's, environmentalism and what's happening. Huh? It's okay. It will be okay. But yeah, it was an interesting exercise for us to look at other ways of storytelling the brand. So we developed a couple of these short films in. It's okay. Yeah, okay. We developed a series of short films for each season in replacement of a sort of a traditional défilé that were these sort of theses on the collections themselves and were takedowns of traditional sort of American Hollywood films. So we made, for example, the Western, Spirit of Freedom, which came with its own series of merchandise and had its own stars and its entire fake Hollywood version of itself, all tied to the collection, which was all about American iconography. The following one was titled Endurance, which was a study of sort of Arctic exploration and global warming in terms of climate change, glacier melting, all that kind of stuff, which I'll show you in a second. What? Yeah. No? No sound. There's no sound. There's no sound. There's no sound.
This world is fading, and in its place, a new one is being born. Hello.
There's been an incident. It won't be like last time. We need you on this mission.
Entire ecosystems are collapsing, and this is just the beginning of the mass extinction. You know that extinction is the rule, and survival is the exception. But it's too late. We've gone too far. It will destroy everything. We have met the enemy, and the enemy is ourselves. But in order to be saved, to truly reach the naked soul of man, we must rebuild.
So, yeah, that was basically an example of what we've done, which in my mind was a great way to teach environmentalism to people that, quite frankly, don't give a shit. in a way that's lighthearted and also quite earnest at the same time. And it's a great vehicle to show your clothing in environments that would be completely impossible otherwise. During Fashion Week, where you're stuck to being in Paris, and within that, even only certain arrondissements of Paris at certain times. And depending on your budgets, also you're left with certain things. There's a lot of other factors, so it's great to have these more permanent means. People can revisit films, people can sit with them, you can watch it 6 times in a row, and it's not a live event. So as our films evolved, we were introduced to XR, and around the same time I kind of discovered NFTs. And it was like, yeah, I remember the first time we went for a demo of XR with Meadow, and we were told this very crazy phrase, which is anything is possible. And I don't know if anyone else is a creative person, like your mind just kind of like, you just can't really, like everything started to unravel. I'm back like in my bedroom as this 6-year-old wannabe Disney Imagineer being like, whoa, this is fully insane. You certainly afterwards realize there are certain budgetary and time constraints, which definitely put very real limits on certain things. But despite it, it was a great exercise in building a whole universe, from start to finish. Not only the clothing, but creating the people, the environment. I mean, it's a whole 360 experience. And yeah, I can show that as well.
Sure,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, let's do it. How do we? Just come It's fun. I don't know. I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, you start to sort of scratch. I don't know. This film was definitely a very, very big leap for us in terms of technicalities and production in general. And I've never done anything that like techie before. I mean, we sell hoodies. But it started to develop into this crazy thing, and there's even a whole component of stuff that we didn't actually do in the end in terms of developing NFTs and augmented reality filters and all this whole technical side, which could have even like, you know, made it more insane. But again, time, money, all these things put certain boundaries on stuff. But just let's walk with me, if you will, and I'll take you through some looks and what that kind of look could have looked like. You know, so we have this guy. It's all real clothes. Everything's for sale. It's fashion as we all know and understand it. This one, which, you know, the idea is, so his top is part of our gold label collection, which is this curated vintage thing. So he's wearing a piece that is essentially found. And then the bottom half is new collection stuff. And then you could imagine he's got like some kind of digital battle axe that you sell as a limited NFT. And it's presented in the video and sort of, you know, we just sort of glaze over the whole thing. We don't even talk about it. This one, you could additionally have some kind of augmented reality filter. Okay, maybe he's got like some cool sunglasses that are an NFT that you can sell, or some filter on his clothing that you have a version of it in the film that is then sold in a real life version that you can get, you know, so maybe the patches move or there's a certain animated effect that doesn't translate to real life, obviously. This is part of our lab series. It's physical, it's already enough. It's made of old potato sacks, and it's part of our, I mean, I love this, it's a, you know, soft sculpture, basically. It's part of our lab division of the brand, which is essentially just hardcore upcycling experiments. So we've got this made from old potato sacks, we've got some stuff made, belts made from old bike tires, some necklaces that you've seen throughout that are made of old like computer parts and junk. You know, like these kind of very like recycling experiments. You know, and here's like another look that, you know, this guy's cool with his dreadlocks, but what if he was like that dude's big muscly lady instead? You know, I mean, yeah, it would look pretty cool. So, you know, you start to kind of see the possibilities in terms of digital presentation and, yeah, this, I guess, merchtainment or just like this gray area in between that is more than just physical product, I think. You know, I haven't done that much of it, but it's definitely something that's been really interesting to think about as like a thought experiment. You know, all of a sudden, like, after going through this exercise and then watching Paris Fashion Week just happen, honestly, like a couple days ago, like, the idea of going to a room and watching a bunch of 17-year-olds walk around in a circle in front of me just seems a little bit, I don't know, boring, the old school, I don't know. It's just like, I think there's just better solutions. Not that one invalidates the other. You know, I think there's certain houses that should and always will do a fashion show. I mean, someone told me once that like Chanel must always do a couture show, and I agree. Like, do it. But we don't have that history. We don't have that board to answer to. We don't necessarily, you know, it's basically just me and working with my subconscious trying to build this business. So in a way, I'm free to do whatever the hell I want. So yeah, it's just kind of cool to try. That's basically it.
That's very exciting, Spencer. I think the perspective of a fashion designer really, being not satisfied with the physicality of fashion as it's coming back to again after the pandemic, and the kind of vision to dress avatars, play with different mediums. I think it's very exciting. I'm not a fashion guru, far from it, but I can see that there is actually no one right now doing proper fashion in the sense of the trade of a fashion designer for the virtual world. There's right now experiments. We talked about Balenciaga earlier, or Gucci is doing some stuff, but it's always about replicating what's already in there and kind of mimicking it online, which we've seen this morning and earlier yesterday. Is a rap that is at the same time obvious, but also fairly limited as compared to the fantasies of doing new stories, new worlds, or more interesting things.
Yeah, developing things kind of like from scratch that are geared toward that universe.
We can really have questions for Spencer. I'll start with one. We were talking about this earlier when we were preparing, and you mentioned something that's off calendar. What does that mean, off calendar?
I mean, basically the fashion industry operates on a very set calendar in the sense that, like, for the rest of my life, if I follow the fashion calendar, I will be doing a fashion show on the 3rd week of January and the 3rd week of June for the rest of my life for menswear.
And you will die from it.
And I will die. I have died multiple times from it. And the women's wear operates on its own calendar, and you see brands, mostly larger brands like Gucci, for example, or Balenciaga. These people who have already that kind of big following going off calendar and sort of doing what they want. And what I've seen, especially, and this is again something that was kind of pushed by COVID, is, I mean, I don't think anyone in this room has really like set their calendar to like watch a YouTube video and set, it's like, oh my God, it's 8 p.m. I've got to get to my phone. Like, that's not how we do things nowadays. So I think that we can, I'm going off calendar in the sense of I'm going to be doing my own thing, dropping a collection when I want to, versus following these deadlines, which are a little bit relentless also. And yeah, you can kind of do things whenever you want.
I think this to me echoes other trades, other worlds, like the world of art, for example, which is structured around fairs, or has been structuring itself, especially the market side of it. The trades fairs are happening again this year, right now, and the idea of many artists participating in these fairs and playing with the metaverse is also to go off calendar, is also to be proposing something of a relationship to their audience that can be continuous, that can be not guided by these fair events. And that, I think, echoes again the video games business, which, as I knew, was structured around Christmas. And basically would sell 80% of video games during the 4 weeks leading to Christmas. And with online games, that has changed completely. Because then it becomes a monthly thing or even a weekly thing. So this idea of off calendar is interesting also to connect to the fashion, because then you basically create a metaverse that you can animate depending on inspiration and times, and you control it basically.
Yeah, I mean, we are like, next year we have all these like small projects coming out. We have our main season dropping in the spring, but we're not going to have something in January during Fashion Week. We have something in May. We've got something. I mentioned this gold label vintage project, which we do as pop-ups and activations, and this kind of ongoing series of little things, and then you can drop a big one tied to, say, a huge film or a whatever digital experience that I'm able to develop in whatever time frame. I think also if you want to do bigger, ambitious projects, you can't really, unless you have a team of like 300 people, do them every 6 months without something happening.
There's a deep concern for your relationship to nature with Phipps, and going virtual for you, is it kind of a way to practice upcycling in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't waste anything making an XR film and a bit of energy.
Yeah, it depends which kind of NFT you do.
Yeah, exactly. This is when you start talking about the NFTs and which one's better or worse, because,
Right.
I mean, I don't need to say that whole side of the conversation. But it is a debate, and it's definitely something, sustainability being kind of the core of the business is definitely an interesting conversation, because on one hand, you're not going to waste resources. Like, what if I told you that probably depending on the larger brands, like 80% of what you see on the runway is not produced. You know, you might get like a handbag and a parka, pair of shoes that end up in the store, and the rest of it's just basically image stuff. So, you know, it's a lot of waste. And what if Prada decided to do 80% of their show digitally? Because at the end of the day, like you're saying, it's a brand story. It's not necessarily a sales tool like it was 20 years ago. So why don't you focus on making nice images and do it in a way that's a little bit less wasteful?
Great. Any question from for Spencer? Some fashionistas in the room? No, we don't say that word in the
I don't. You.
Great. Thank you very much, Spencer.
Yeah, okay, cool.